A new Expo SDK means two things. First, new features to talk about for creators like me, but second, and more importantly, new options for developers like you to make your apps better and faster. In this video, we'll take a look at all the new stuff of Expo SDK 53, which means CLI and EAS updates. We're gonna have to talk about new Expo packages. We have Expo router updates, and we also have a completely new Expo UI package that will blow you away. But this new version could also cause some headache for developers upgrading from prior versions. There are some deprecations and breaking changes, and of course we're gonna talk about that as well. So now let's take a look at the release notes and an actual app using Expo SDK 53. If you're thinking about getting back into React Native now with Expo SDK 53, check out the mission on galaxies.dev. So this Zero to Hero mission is made for every React Native developer, and it just builds up your skills from the fundamentals over all the important topics like data, state management, UI, native capabilities, everything that you need. So go check this out on Galaxies. This course is now complete. It has, I think, 7 modules by now, and pretty much everyone who has been through the galaxies.dev mission, the Zero to Hero course, just loved it. So I'd love to welcome you inside as well. Check it out. You can find it here, explore, missions, and then you will be guided to the Zero to Hero mission on Galaxies. Now, the release post for Expo SDK 53, as usual, is quite long. It contains a lot of different updates, and I try to group the things into categories that make sense for you so you don't have to read all of it. However, I still recommend you take a look at it because there are sometimes things that I might not see as important, but it might be important to your application. So first of all, the new architecture is now the default everywhere. This might be good or bad. I had my own little fight with the new architecture recently, but it is enabled by default in all new projects. Just be aware of that. You can always opt out. If you go to your app.json, you're gonna see here, new arc enabled true. If you set that to false and then rebuild your application, you will opt out of the new architecture. That might be required in some cases, but I would still recommend you give it a try as long as possible, or just upgrade your packages to work with the latest versions. Other general news. There is now edge-to-edge support for Android projects, and it's actually the default. If you don't know about edge-to-edge support, and I'm also not a frequent Android user, this visualizes it pretty good. No, I don't want to do a survey. So now you won't be, or your screen won't be covered by that ugly status bar in that bottom area, and your application will just look a lot better. So all this overlay stuff will be removed. I think there was even another video on this page somewhere that really nicely showcase. So here's a list. On the left side, you see you got this area up here, and you even got an area at the bottom. If you have edge-to-edge support like we now do, it will be a whole lot better. And there's a great package, and this is now the default for Android projects. I don't see a problem with this. I think this is just great. On top of that, with the SDK 53, we have support for React Native 0.79, which is the latest version, as well as React 19. So if you haven't checked this out, check it out on the react.dev blog. There's a React 19 upgrade guide. You probably don't need to look at the things that are web specific. Also, you kind of don't really have to do this if you're starting with the new Expo application, as React 19 will be included, as I see here in my just created application, Expo 53, and we got React 19. However, if you also want React Native 19.1, that's also possible, because with React 19.1, you get something pretty cool, which Evan showcased a couple of weeks ago already, which is called the owner stack. And with the owner stack, you can get a lot better errors, as you can see. My favorite error, text strings must be rendered with a text component. Absolutely unhelpful, but with React 19.1, you actually pinpoint this to a specific place in your code. So I highly recommend checking this out. There are other features like the new use hook. Is there anything else in here? They're pretty cool things. Let me know if you would like to see a video on like some changes of React 19 and how you can benefit in your application from that. Just be aware that with the right flag, you can actually get this in your application as well by setting the experiments React canary to true in your app config. Additional general update is that we now have faster startup times. With React Native 0.79, Metro startup speed increased, I would almost say dramatically, by 3 times in large projects. And as well, you know, I'm jumping around in this, but it still makes sense, like we're going through the general stuff. On top of that, the package.json export field is now enabled by default in Metro Bundle. If you're like me and you really like Expo, but you sometimes don't know like about these nitty-gritty specific things, then this might not mean much to you, as it didn't mean to me, but you can read this as your application startup becomes faster. Also, we're going to take a look at this later. This is Expo Atlas. This can help you pinpoint some of the issues that might arise by using the package.json exports field. However, I think that's everything for the general news. So let's take a look at specific Expo packages now. This is usually my favorite category as there are always new packages. Right now we have an improved background tasks package. I actually think I haven't used the previous one, but now there's a new one called Expo Background Task. For Expo Background Task, there's also a complete tutorial on the blog that you can check out. Goodbye, background fetch. This will be deprecated in favor of Expo Background Task, which helps to use the latest implementations of Swift and Android for background tasks. Pretty much the code is written here. You can define background tasks, and later you're gonna have to register them in your application. I personally am not a big fan of background tasks. I know they can be great, especially if you use EAS updates and checking for updates regularly in the background. However, I don't like the randomness of these background tasks. Always in the past when I tried to use them, they never executed when I want them to execute, because ultimately background tasks will be handled by the operating system. And if Apple thinks that the user hasn't used this application in 3 months, why should I run a background task every 30 minutes? Then, well, your background task might run every 12 days or something instead. So it is really kind of random, and I really don't like that aspect. Anyway, there's a new package. We also have now a stable version of Expo Audio. So over the last SDKs, Expo was working on new Expo Audio and Expo Video packages instead of the old Expo AV Audio Video package. And the Expo Audio package is now stable. Probably even more exciting is a new Expo Maps package. There's also a blog post covering this, introducing Expo Maps. Beto also had a great video on this. I actually think I used it in my code. So the pretty cool thing about this is that, let's go to this. On the map screen, you now have an implementation directly for Apple Maps or for Google Maps. I also, let me try to bring this up in my, okay, here it is. iOS uses the Apple Maps. On Android, it just crashed because I probably didn't add the appropriate stuff. Yeah, that didn't work. But let me know in the comments if you would like to see a tutorial on Expo Maps and everything that we can do, because I think there's a whole lot that we can do with that new package, and Maps is an essential feature, I know, for many of you out there. So go check this out, Expo Maps new package, but still in alpha stage. What I definitely like about this, and I wanted to highlight, is that these packages like video, camera, audio, they share the Expo philosophy, which is focusing primarily on developer experience and handling the most common use cases people would expect. So please don't be sad if your edge case isn't included in one of these packages that Expo is doing. These are really meant for like the 80-90% of people that just want to have like a map with markers. So that's the same for camera. If you need a better camera, you can still use Vision Camera from Mark Rusavi or something. So these are really, this is like the philosophy of the core Expo packages. However, they also added something pretty cool to Expo CLI, which I've teased a couple of times and heard the first time with Beto on the Rocket Ship podcast. Expo CLI now has web support. That is pretty big, actually. So if you consider this, previously, when I built this for Android and iOS, I could never test my application on the browser with SQLite. It just didn't work. And now you can. You can with web support. And I think this is a pretty big thing. So here it is. Expo CLI now includes experimental support for web. It uses WebAssembly build of SQLite based on WA SQLite. Also, Expo CLI now supports libSQL in collaboration with Terso. We've shipped support for their offline sync public beta. That's pretty cool. We should maybe get more into offline sync It has been, well, it's not the latest thing. It has been around for a couple of years now, but it's still something we should talk about. Now, there's one more package that I found that had the new tag here in the Expo SDK. I don't know if this is new with Expo SDK 53. I just want to mention it that there's an Expo Mesh Gradient. So this is for an implementation for Swift UI in React Native. The code looks something like this. Where is it? Not here. I think I just wanted to bring it in. So let me just bring in the mesh gradient here and give me that code. Just throwing it into my application. Then we're going to take a look. So here is the mesh gradient, combination of all these colors and points where these colors should be. I don't know exactly where I could need this in my app, but I think putting up this maybe in the background and something dark above it, it could give a nice effect in my application. I didn't knew that I needed this package, but here we go. The Expo Mesh Gradient seems to be new as well. And finally, one more thing, the Expo Notifications package got some improvements. So you can now have custom images, and as well the iOS implementation has been almost entirely converted to Swift and Expo modules API. This is pretty cool because this is more or less the standard internally now, I would guess, at Expo, and this just makes it a lot easier to improve it in the future, and I'm looking forward to those improvements. But those are the biggest news around new packages. Let's talk about CLI and EAS changes. So for the Expo CLI, nothing too dramatically changed. Flat config support, yeah, in Expo config, that's pretty cool. Bigger, I think, is even that Expo Atlas has been promoted from experimental to stable. So if you haven't checked out Expo Atlas, it's a tool to analyze your JavaScript bundle. So you saw that image already before. It shows like the sizes of different libraries in your application. I think it's really, really cool that this is now stable. Another thing that was added to the Expo CLI is actually web worker support. So this is experimental in Expo SDK 53 and it will only work on the web. On native platforms, you can still use something like the worklets from Reanimated, and maybe we can talk more about that in the future as they're working on a separate package. However, with the web worker feature on the web, you can do something in the background. You can put off some heavy load or anything you want actually to that worker. I think this is pretty cool. It is a bit, I don't know, tricky to use maybe. I know in the past it was kind of like challenging to set this up and then expect it in the browser, but we can probably get more into this soon. On top of that, is there anything else? Yeah, we have improved error messages, of course. This will be, of course, even better with the React 19.1 integration of the owner stack. We also can now update DOM components with EAS updates. I didn't know that that wasn't possible before, but it's now in experimental support. So be a bit careful about that. In terms of EAS, there are a couple of general updates that will, I guess, usually make your apps faster. You can now also download your application that was built with EAS using EAS build download, which is also used for the remote build caching. Is there a point about the remote build caching? I think there was, because that's actually quite big. So with remote build caching, you can get your builds on a device a whole lot faster. So if you run npx expo run iOS the first time, it was built with EAS. So if you're using EAS, then you know this can take some time. However, if you then run it again after removing the app or someone else is doing this, Expo will just pull down the remote build cache and the app will become available on your phone or simulator almost instantly if it's using this. It's used like 400 milliseconds here. So additionally, as I said, there's now the command to actually download those files as well. And beyond that, we have some build comparison and fingerprint comparison, which was introduced in the past, like the fingerprint of your releases and comparing them. Update and download count, average download time. You will probably look through that stuff if you're using EAS specifically. Let's talk about an experiment and something that many of you have been waiting for. Swift UI and Jetpack components directly available in React Native with a new Expo UI package. I think this is big. Many people have been waiting for this. I know that when I got started, I hated that there were no real components, but now we got this package. It is super early, it is alpha stage, and you gotta be really careful with that package. While trying to record this video, I think the docs changed about 3 times and how we import stuff. So you can install the Expo UI package in your application, and let me give you a quick example of how this could look like. Maybe I should put this to the side. So I have brought up this page here, UI, and on that UI page, you're gonna see a couple of things. I do have a button up here, I have a picker up here, and I do have a color picker as well. And they're all coming from the Expo UI Swift UI package. Additionally, they're down here, so you can see them. The button is connected actually to a bottom sheet, so this is maybe one of the coolest components. See how this slides in? I really love that bottom sheet component. And you see the button sheet is just here. Is opened on his open change. We got some components in there. Also, I think the picker is really cool. I did this previously with Reanimated, and now you can just bring in the package. This is just Swift UI. I don't know why we needed a color picker and on top of these other primitives, but it's cool to have something like this right at your fingertip. This is the native color picker. I didn't know this actually exists. I don't know if I've seen this in any application, but I definitely just want to build an application to use this color picker because it looks so cool. Now, you might ask, okay, Simon, this is Swift UI. What about Android? Well, for Android, you can use this as well. I brought up my application here. Let's see. Of course, it didn't work right now. Let's start it again. Okay, that is a good error. Unable to, okay, what did, yeah, I used the mesh stuff in here. We shouldn't do that. That's a bad idea. Let's reload the application. Let's get rid of the mesh gradient view. Okay, and let's open it up again. Then we should see our application as well. So here we go, going to the UI, you see on iOS, we have this button, which is more or less the native button and the picker. Here we see the native Android styling for buttons. And also that picker is actually pretty dope. I really love that. Now, the only problem at this point is how you import that stuff, because most of this comes from a specific package. So here you see it comes from Swift UI. And that means this page didn't work for Android. I had to create a separate UI.android file where I got most of the stuff from the Jetpack Compose package. So that means there are a handful of components here. So we have the bottom sheet, a button, a color picker, a datetime picker, which is pretty cool. The picker wheel, switch, and whatnot. And then it already goes to the Jetpack components, which are like buttons, pickers, and actually a pretty short list. However, I think the beginning here is really great. If you want to see more of them in action, you can check this out on the Expo repository. There's actually an app included, and under native components, lists, or screens, UI, you can find this long list with implementation, and you're always going to see an Android and an iOS implementation. I previously also saw examples where you just had to import from Expo/UI. I think they kind of already ditched that again, and you now have to separately import from Jetpack Compose and Swift UI, but I think this is an amazing start. I've been looking forward to this for a long time because it gives you access to a bunch of primitives in your application that you should just like, it's so cool to have them. Swift UI and Jetpack Compose are doing many things right, and accessing them easily from your React Native application just gives you more options. This doesn't mean that you have to style every of your applications using these components. Therefore, the list is too limited for that. But just being able to bring them in and in the future have a growing list of Expo UI components, especially for new developers coming for React Native, is in my eyes absolutely a killer feature by Expo. Thanks for this package. Let's talk about one of my favorite packages, Expo Router. Expo Router actually just has a pretty short section here. If you look at the overall doc, there's a lot of text and a lot of images and experiments, and then we got Expo Router, and it's pretty much like 5 bullet points. But those are actually really, really important. So let's take a look. Can we just get them? Okay, so we have build time redirects and rewrites. I think this actually existed before. This pretty much helps you to add a redirect component or use a redirect component in your code. Especially if you have sort of an authentication, it makes it really easy to redirect users to specific screens in your application. So instead of using the imperative API, you can just bring in the redirect component and it works really great. Now, more interesting to me were actually the guarded groups, because I've not seen any single example of that before, and also prefetching routes. So let me show you a quick example of what this is. If you implement any kind of authentication mechanism in your app, you know that it's kind of hard to protect the app. We had to like do a group with parentheses and then group the stuff, and in the layout do some checks. Now what you can do is you can actually have stack.protected and a guard function. I really like the name guard anyway, because from Swift I really loved guard. So in this case, I'm protecting the private screen, and I just set is logged in to false. If I now try to navigate to the private screen, it just won't work. I can't access that page. If now I change this to true, let's do this, and I go to private, I can access that private page. It's as easy as that with a guard function. I really love this feature. You see, the rest of my application is available down here. I could also put this into a guard of like not logged in. That's the example you're going to see in the documentation, because maybe you don't want users to go to the login page when they're already signed in, and you want to protect some inside areas with this stack protected guard. Really love this. Definitely gonna see this in many of my upcoming videos. However, one word of caution in here. Protected screens are evaluated on the client side only. That means during static site generation, for example, this will not work. If users know the URL, they can still go there. Also, protected screens are not a replacement for server-side authentication or access control. I've always told this for front-end applications. Don't rely only on authentication on the client. Real authentication happens on the API side, where you like verify your JWT or do any kind of other authentication with a cookie. So this is really just making sure that people in the app can't go to pages they shouldn't go to, but you can't rely on this 100%. Now, there's one more thing I wanted to show you, and that is the prefetch option. So right now, let's do a little refresh here. Okay, so my app loads, I go to this page. If I now go to like the map page, we're gonna see the log from the map screen. If I go to UI, we're gonna see the log from the UI screen. Those are just logs in those pages right at the top when they are created. Now see what happens if I put a prefetch on a specific link in my index page. So for the map and UI, I will just add prefetch, and I will add this in here as well, prefetch. Okay, let me save this. And we see this page loads, and it actually prefetches the links that we marked with prefetch on this page. So both the map and UI are now prefetched in the background. I think this is really a cool and great new feature that we can use in our application to improve the loading times of pages. There are some limitations in what can happen and how you can use the navigation, so definitely check out the documentation. But I think this is another fantastic addition by Evan. Now, finally, they also have pretty cool new documentations that you can check out for Expo Router and make authentication and other flows using an initial redirect easier to build. Apps are now wrapped in a virtual route navigator to ensure all navigation events can be processed. I think this will help many people out there, because there was a common issue with authentication, which you had in the top layout file, and then there was like an error, and that was also mentioned in the Expo documentation. And under troubleshooting, I can't find that error anymore. So I assume that error is gone, that you like at least had to render some sort of slot or router component to then use your authentication. You had to bring it down a level. It was kind of challenging. And I think wrapping this in a virtual navigator now makes sure that we don't see that problem anymore in the future. So authentication got a lot easier with Expo Router, including redirects and guard groups, prefetching, and the virtual route navigator. As I said in the beginning, it can be a painful update if you're a couple of SDK versions behind and you didn't watch out for deprecations. Just want to mention this again. Expo AV was now replaced by Expo Video and Expo Audio. Will not publish any new versions in the future with Expo SDK 54. Additionally, as we talked about, background fetch will be replaced by Expo background task. There's a new field. The field in the config has been deprecated, not too crazy, but also push notifications are no longer supported in Expo Go for Android. I think I said this in all last videos. Please don't rely on Expo Go that much anymore. Just run npx expo pre-build and you have your native projects. You can deploy them straight to your devices. You can live reload and hot reload and everything that you're used to from Expo Go, and you're free to do everything else. This is pretty much like the eject from the past. I think I don't want to use that word anymore. Expo doesn't like to see it anywhere, but you know what I mean. Just do a pre-build. Also, React DevTools has been removed from the Expo CLI. I think we talked about the new debugging. Usually just press J and then it will launch the DevTools that you should use. Right now, here you can see your network traffic, you can see your consoles, you can see your components. The React Native DevTools got an upgrade a couple of versions ago and are the way to debug your applications right now. This has been a long video, but I want to end with two notable things that I picked out from the documentation. Especially the first one is super interesting. React Server Functions support is now in beta. Now, previously, React Server Functions didn't really work with EAS hosting, but now they work. And you can set Expo Unstable Deploy Server Variable to true to use React Server Functions in production with EAS. This is actually bigger than it looks like from this. It's just like one node, but I think we should definitely make a video on using React Server Functions in a great way in our application. We've already seen this before with Evan's great examples that he shared on GitHub. There is so much possible with React Server Functions, and most people and developers don't really know how to really use React Server Functions with React Native, like the whole mental concept of what this means and how it works. So this is kind of like unnoticed, but I think it's really something we should take note of. Additionally, there is one more thing that I just want to warn you about. The whole new architecture is a bit challenging. React 19 might be challenging for your application with the packages in your application, but if you're using Supabase, be aware of this paragraph. Supabase is not currently compatible with React Native's package.json export change. I know there has been a little issue. I think they fixed it by now, so you can use Supabase. Just if you experience any problems with Supabase, be aware of this change related to Expo SDK 53. Alright, that's it for today. Honestly, this video got way longer than I expected. I wanted to do like a 10-15 minutes quick look at the new features. Now it become probably half an hour. My list of notes was really long and there were so many interesting things included. Maybe the one thing that really stands out from SDK 53 are the new Expo UI components. It is still a kind of small package, it is in alpha, but it might really help a lot of developers in the future. Let me know in the comment, what do you think? I've seen comments on Roberto's video that this is like everything developers always wanted. And I think it's honestly really great. So let me know if you want to see more about Expo UI components in the comments, as well as what is your favorite new feature of Expo SDK 53? Maybe it's not, maybe it's edge-to-edge support or the EAS remote build cache. Let me know, I read all the comments, and I would also love to see what would you like to see in a future SDK in Expo SDK 54? Let's already look at that and imagine what else could be improved in our React Native applications. If you want to get back into React Native now and are excited about Expo SDK 53, check out galaxies.dev, check out our Zero to Hero mission, which covers everything, should be compatible with SDK 53, perfectly fine to gear you up from the basics of React Native to becoming an expert. So check it out on galaxies.dev, and don't forget, hit the like and subscribe button, share the video with your colleagues and friends that want to stay up to date with React Native, and as always, happy coding, Simon.